If you enjoyed The Witcher, the new Netflix original series Cursed has a lot of the similar feels to it. There are fun fights, some mysterious and magical elements. Is this new take on the Arthur legend worth the watch? This is a reimagining of the Arthur legend. It's almost a prequel to how Arthur came to be and how he found the Sword of Power, what we assume to be Excalibur. The story has some familiar characters. There's Merlin, Arthur of course, Sir Gawain the Green Knight, and Morgana. The main focus of this story is our heroine, Nimue, played by Katherine Langford. She's of the Fae, which is sort of a magical or mystical creature, and she has the power to control plants. Kind of like the Lorax, except she doesn't speak for the trees, she speaks to them. I think she does a pretty good job of crafting the character because sometimes she's really timid and then other times she's super fierce. I mean, she has this task thrust upon her, so she has to accept the responsibility and then step up to it. And she carries the show pretty well, but I think it does better because there is an ensemble cast there to support her as well. I really dug the characters of Merlin and Arthur. I mean, they have both of them a different type of sarcastic wit to them. And then you combine the fact that they are both flawed characters, and it just makes them so much richer in depth. There's some really cool long takes that they do in some of the action scenes, and it works really well. One of the things that I like too is this is based off of a Frank Miller novel, and so we have some really cool stylized fights, stylized violence, and some brutal gore. There are some fight scenes though where the attackers really could have used some strategy on their side. There are paladins, which are basically some warrior monks, and when they are then attacking their opponent, they chose to go one by one as versus being a horde, which would be so much more effective. It makes the battles just a little less epic when they have this huge group of people, but they don't send them all at once, that it's just here, 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 and it loses a lot of the effectiveness because now our heroes, or whoever they happen to be fighting, it's not really them against a huge number, it's one-on-one, and they just happen to knock one off each time. Most of the special effects in this work really well, and I really appreciate it when they do the stylized fighting and the violence, because we get to see some gory violence. And I mean, because there are sword fights and wow, unflinching at times. And it's kind of cool. And it reminds me a little bit at times of like 300, where you have that blood splash, and it works in the context of this. But sometimes they're using some effects just within the filmmaking, not necessarily special effects, which they don't employ often, or they do it once and it breaks everything because we've never seen this effect before, and it just really pulls you out because it's so odd. I really would have preferred a consistency to how they were framing the shots and how they were doing these. I mean, I'm okay if you want to employ some shaky cam or some weird zoom or something like that, and every time that you have a sequence like that, employ that. But when you're inconsistent when you have those types of things, it just breaks the whole feel of the entire show. It's hard to not draw some comparisons to other shows or movies. Like, for example, Lord of the Rings. There are some moments in this that really do feel like they come from Lord of the Rings. And that's not a bad thing, because Lord of the Rings is one of the greatest movie series of all time. We have portions in this where there are like whispers traveling across the wind. Shire, Baggins. And so it has that sort of element within this show as well. And it happens throughout the show, so it maintains a consistency in that, and I liked that. There are actually several other parallels to Lord of the Rings within this show. One of them is the Sword of Power, and the effect that that sword has on other people, the draw to it, and what people do to maintain it or to keep it. I think the lore that they create in this is pretty interesting, especially because it's a reimagining of the tale of Arthur. I was really impressed by this one scene just showing how the Sword of Power came to be. The pace is patient and measured, and it's not exactly slow, at least at the beginning of the series. There is a lot that they are putting into this story, and so they're trying to have it unfold as each chapter continues. Now, I'm not saying that they can't trim down some of the episodes to make the story move a little faster, because they certainly could. I mean, sometimes it just feels so long, and by about the midway point in the series, honestly, I was getting bored. I think one of the issues this series suffers from is trying to cram too many characters and too much information into the story. What that does is it makes some of the episodes and then the overall story just as a whole very cramped and a little more complicated than it needs to be. There are a couple of storylines even that feel like they're offshoots, that they're just kind of unnecessary because we get little bits and pieces and they just kind of float off to the side there. There is supposedly an urgency to the plot, but there is no rush, really, that we see on the part of the characters to accomplish this goal. I mean, it's all just kind of puffed up talk. It doesn't really lead anywhere. Overall, this became dull. The chemistry that was there between the characters just kind of got lost, and I found myself struggling to want to continue to watch. And the dialogue isn't always the greatest, but for the most part it was decent. This is an ambitious show, but that's also what weakens it. What was it that the commander said in Top Gun? Son, your ego's writing checks that your body can't cash. That's kind of what's going on here. The show has some really good potential, but it falters under the weight of its own ambition. I think if you're a fan of The Witcher, or Game of Thrones, or The Lord of the Rings, that you can get some enjoyment out of this, but really know that this is not nearly as exciting as any of those. I'm curious where they're going to take this and how they might build upon it. If you're a fanboy of this show, more power to you. I really wanted to like this, but it just kept working against me. There's sex, nudity, mild profanity, and a lot of graphic violence. I give Cursed 2 out of 5 couches. What's your favorite Arthur-themed show or movie? One of mine is Disney's The Sword and the Stone. I just absolutely love that. And The Wizard's Duel is spectacular. But I'd love to know what yours is in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me. Is this new take on the Arthurian? That is a stupid word. Is this new take on the Arthur legend worth the watch?